Thank you, Wansin, and welcome everyone to our second panel this afternoon on human-centered artificial intelligence for social good. And as we are all aware, automated decision-making influenced by or informed by algorithms is penetrating our daily lives, may it be the workplace, the private sphere, or society on a broader level. And we can well expect that artificial intelligence has an ever-growing influence on all aspects of our societies, may it be the economy, our governance, or healthcare sector, but also education sector. And I think we will talk about education a lot on this panel today. Now, artificial intelligence and new digital technologies will bring new development opportunities and benefits to our society. We've already heard some examples today, for example, in the care of our elderly people, so also in preventing medical errors or increasing productivity, we will see some benefits. But of course, we will also face challenges and risks induced by artificial intelligence. So we hear a lot about the fear of losing jobs, losing tasks. There are concerns with data privacy and data security, and some also are warning about social unrest that might be induced due to the use of artificial intelligence. So in this panel, we want to discuss on some key elements of societal challenges that come along with the introduction of more and more artificial intelligence. And we want to hear some solution proposals from our distinguished panelists. So to my left side, we have Jason Blackstock. He's a professor at University College London from the UK. He's a co-founder of the department at UCL on science, technology, engineering, and public policy. So here we already see a connection between technology and social sciences. And he is also the founder of the How to Change the World program, which I'm a big fan of, I have to admit, where engineers and other technical students have to tackle real-world problems. We'll hear probably more on this later on. Next to Jason, we have Michael Fung. He is a deputy executive at SkillsFuture Singapore, a statutory agency under the Ministry of Education in Singapore. And there he is responsible for the continuing education and training systems. And so he has a very good overview, I think, in this domain. Then we have Jin-Hyun Kim. He's the CEO of Artificial Intelligence Research Institute in Korea, and he's also a professor emeritus at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, where he taught artificial intelligence, pattern recognition, and neural networks. And so he has very good insights on how to teach artificial intelligence and related technologies. Last but not least, we have Mike Orszag, who's the head of research at Willis Tower Watson in the United States, where he has been working for quite some time now and has shaped the evolution of its research and developed new approaches to client problems. So I'm very excited to hear your contributions. But before we start with the solution proposals that you have prepared, I would like to raise a short but maybe difficult question. And while I will invite the panelists to answer this question, I would also like for the public to think about this question, because I think it's very important, especially when it comes to the communication of artificial intelligence and new technologies to the general population. So for me, artificial intelligence is kind of a black box, I have to admit. So I'm a behavioral economist by training, and I do research in that domain. So I don't know a lot about artificial intelligence, but I do know something about the motivation of people, how people take decisions, and how they adapt to changing contexts, changing environments. And I think artificial intelligence has drawn quite some public attention recently. And one reason for that is that artificial intelligence somehow already influences our lives quite a lot, but it's not really visible. And most of the people do not fully understand how artificial intelligence actually influences our lives. And this leads to the fact that many people are very concerned, are afraid of artificial intelligence, are afraid of the developments. And this is fueled by forecasts, for example, that say half of the jobs will be at least at risk through artificial intelligence and might be lost. So my question to you and for the public is, do you think that the benefits of artificial intelligence for society outweigh the risks? Maybe put it more drastically, do you think that artificial intelligence is putting the world at danger? Jason?
She's looking at me, I have to go first. I believe that there are significant risks, no question, but I don't believe they outweigh the potential benefit. I do believe that the benefit, so long as we make effective choices in terms of putting, going back to the last panel or even the title of this, this entire workshop, putting humans at the center of our design thinking around AI.
Thank you, Jason.
The artificial intelligence has been around for quite some time. It's just that, you know, different waves of it, different levels of capability. And I'm an optimist. I think as a human race, we will find a way to make the benefits of AI outweigh the risk and the downside.
Okay. The future is not deterministic. So there are many possibilities. What happens depending on what you do. Nobody knows how our society looks like in the year 2050. That time, I'm approached to 100 years old. Believe that? Well, I'm more worried about the growing the AI combination with biotech. It really is something special and worryable.
I think to summarize what everyone said is that AI is an opportunity. We don't know yet what's going to happen with that opportunity, and it's up to us to determine whether it's for good or for bad.
Okay, so I hope that everyone here in this room will help to develop artificial intelligence into a direction that will be fruitful for our society and will achieve human-centered artificial intelligence. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mike to present his solution proposals for us and talk a little bit about what type of education we will need to cope with the implications of artificial intelligence.
So in the next 6 minutes, very briefly, I'm going to talk about what I think will change in education generally, and particularly higher education, in the next 20 or 30 years in response to the rise of artificial intelligence and other technologies that are related, like robotics, 3D printing, Internet of Things. Because the underlying issues are much different than the rise of the internet 30 years ago. And to understand the impact on society in the future, we really have to think very far ahead. If we go back 30 years ago, Google didn't exist. That was Google was founded in 1998, Amazon 1994. Yet the implications of the ability to move work around the world, Taiwanese firms are starting to move to mainland China to take advantage of low labor costs, were starting. And we should have been able to foresee at that time that there would be issues with people their work being displaced and all sorts of issues. The implications of artificial intelligence in many respects are much broader than the rise of the internet, because work becomes more localized. You do not need very complex supply chains anymore. You can move work, you can localize work through machines, and that will give rise to a lot of issues. In particular, some work will be directing machines in terms of what to do. Other work, people will be directed by machines, filling in gaps in terms of what machines can't do. Take, for example, an Uber driver who's essentially directed by a machine and can be fired by an algorithm. And for people to get ready for that, and that world is challenging. There are powerful economic mechanisms that will replace people with machines, but at the same time, there are also powerful economic mechanisms that are going to measure productivity more using various sensors and devices, keeping track of what people do on a daily basis and measuring things and almost making people more machine-like. And the issue is, how do people respond to things like that? Now, you can say from a young age you should learn how to program, and that's really important. Some people's response is that there should be more vocational education. That's stupid, because it's very hard to predict the future. It's very hard to predict how things will turn out, and there's a need to be flexible. There's a need to be able to think about the future flexibly. And some people respond to that by saying we need more liberal education. Go back and have broad thinking about topics, because that's what's necessary to get people ready for the future. My main point is that neither of those approaches is going to work. And that education in the future is going to adopt many of the approaches of artificial intelligence. That when we're expecting people to work more closely with machines, it's I think inevitable that education will evolve to be more interactive with machines and more machine directed. Let me give two sort of examples of what I mean, and these are fairly extreme. But the first is emulation. I think about Confucius, and Confucius had a few disciples. They weren't particularly, when I think about, you may not have even heard of Yan Hui or Ran Yong. They weren't all that effective. Imagine if Confucius could have, copy Confucius and have 5,000 copies of Confucius. That would be really effective. Or Dennis Snower. Imagine if we could take Dennis Snower, and instead of just having students in a classroom, we could scale it to have 10,000 copies of Dennis Snower. We download him. Okay, in a sense, we create a download of Dennis Snower because that's what society needs. That's what's needed for production or for doing very well. Or we think about Chun Tzu Kwan. We want 100 Chun Tzu Kwans, but that's something that businesses and society will want. They'll want to actually copy people. Now, there's a literature about emulation, copying people using machines and basically looking at what people do, but you can also use it for education. We can actually, as part of a curriculum, try to be the next Steve Jobs, try to figure out what's good about them and build it into the curriculum. So that's I think one way education will go, is be much more about emulation. Instead of taking Dennis Snower's course, you'll essentially learn through artificial intelligence technology to be like Dennis Snower, to think like him, to do things like him. And that has societal consequences, clearly. And the second way I think education is going to change is more task-based. I think about, it's very clear that machines can teach people. I mean, if Google can develop a machine, DeepMinds, to learn Go, it can teach people how to play Go. And we could think about, something as simple as learning to surf. Why do you need a surf instructor when the surfboard could be telling you how to surf? It could be moving around when you do things that are wrong. And so I could see education being more task-based. So, for instance, studying how to prove a theorem and making sure people know how to prove a theorem, or inventing something. And actually going through, and instead of having a fixed curriculum where people read a certain number of books or great books, thinking about various generic tasks or approaches and trying to make sure people are capable of doing that, and machines could be quite helpful in that process. And that's why my solution proposal is called deep liberal education, because I think a liberal education can be thought about in new ways using the technology of artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this insightful proposal. I'm not so sure, given that Dennis Snower is my boss, I want to have 10,000 copies of him around, but I think the idea of emulation and building on best practices is, of course, very good. And I think I want to invite Michael next, because his solution proposal actually fits very well to what Mike has said, and will make it more concrete a little bit.
So I have 3 solution proposals that's in the booklet that you have, and I don't have time to go into too much detail. But before that, let me just give a couple of minutes of context setting. So we've been talking about AI Industry 4.0, the speed, the scope, and the extent of the disruption that could be brought about due to these trends. So that affects not just companies, but individual workers. How do they remain relevant to the needs of the economy? How do individuals continue to be upskilled and reskilled to be able to take these jobs? And Mike said something quite provocative. He thinks that the current design of training programs and so on is not going to work. He's right to a certain extent, I think, because the effectiveness of these training is very much tied in with mindsets and orientations of individuals. In the Singapore context, we've been focused on workforce development for quite a number of decades, since the 70s and 80s when we started industrializing in a major way. In 2003, we set up the Workforce Development Agency, which is similar to the WDA here in Taiwan, focused on employability training as well as employment, helping individuals get jobs. And then we've been running that model of defining skill standards, providing the training supply, supporting the demand from employers to train their workforce, and been running that model for about 15 years. In 2016, so 2 years ago, we restructured the entire effort because we realized that we need a system that's going to be much more flexible and agile going forward. If you think about the disruptions that we're talking about, it requires new skill sets, and these emerging skills are coming to the marketplace a lot faster than we can design our curriculum for. The traditional model of education delivery is you design, you put in a curriculum, you get it approved through some lengthy process, then you offer the training. By the time the individuals go through lengthy training, the skills are obsolete. So we need a much more flexible system. We launched a major initiative called SkillsFuture in 2015, and my organization was formed in 2016 as a restructure of the WDA with the intention to drive fairly major changes in the entire education and training landscape. So not just looking at continuing training of workers, but also bringing some of these concepts further upstream into the formal education system. So that's the context for the three proposals that I'm putting forth today, and I'll touch on each one of them briefly. These are examples of some of the initiatives that we have designed under the SkillsFuture movement. I don't think we have all the answers. We have some experiments that we're doing right now. Now, so one of the challenges I mentioned earlier was about figuring out what skills are needed by various industries and what kind of quantity and what kind of time frame, so that the labor supply is adequately skilled for the opportunities to come. We've done a couple of things, one of which is to work with the industry consortium across 33 industry sectors to map out what we call the skills frameworks. Based on job families within each of these sectors, we look at different job roles and define what are technical skills as well as the generic soft skills, transversal skills as needed for each job. It's a very lengthy process. It takes us about a year to develop each framework, but we have a language now to talk about the skills needed for each of those jobs and to match it against training supply. And these frameworks have been largely completed. We're rolling all of them out by this year. However, like I said, we need a much more agile and nimble system because of the speed at which these disruptions are happening. So the opportunity here is to use artificial intelligence as a way to augment the skills forecasting process. And we're looking at tapping on various data sources, including job portals, scraping the job descriptions. We're looking at aggregators like Pluralsight, LinkedIn, Burning Glass. What are some of the labor market information that's coming out? And be able to then use intelligent learning algorithms to try to figure out what are some of these emerging skills. An example that I shared with Ingrid over the break is if we are looking at Industry 4.0 skills, one of the best places to scrape job descriptions from would be probably from the job market in Germany. Take a look at what kind of skills employers are asking for in that market. Look at what's the kind of skills set that we have in Singapore and figure out what the gap is. In this space of skills forecasting, I think the opportunity here is to establish some kind of open crowdsourced platform where different countries and different policymakers can essentially contribute to this effort, but also be able to draw insights from a common skills database, if you would. Not something that we have in place today, but I think that's one opportunity that we can look at going forward. The second solution that I will outline is how do we match individuals, learners, with training opportunities and job opportunities. So it's great that now if we can do skills forecasting, we can ensure there's sufficient supply, but how do we guide individuals to figure out what kind of training they should go for, what kind of job opportunities does that lead to. The skills framework that I described earlier provides some kind of guidance, but here again we're trying to use some AI technology to help do some matching. For those of you who have used Amazon, you buy certain books and they recommend to you other products that you could purchase as well, because other customers have displayed certain patterns. And we're now developing the technology behind the platform, the My SkillsFuture platform, where individuals have their learning profile, their career profile entered in the system, to then be able to develop the intelligence and be able to tell the individual, okay, this is your background, and this is what you aspire to do based on the data that we have. 70% of people with your profile has gone for this kind of training and got this kind of jobs. Now, if we can get that kind of marketplace, that information going, I think that will help to narrow the mismatch between skills demand and skills supply. So that's very much in the context of Singapore, a labor market, but there's again an opportunity for cross-border work here to do more linkages between labor supply in different countries with economic opportunities, industry opportunities in other countries, and to help to resolve some of the problems with aging population and declining birth rates. The third solution is about providing emerging skills training for the workforce as a whole, not just the workforce, but for the population as a whole. This whole notion of digital literacy, that bar is being raised. 10, 20 years ago, if you could use Microsoft Word, you can use Excel, you know how to use a mouse and click, you are probably considered digitally literate. In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, if you don't know how to use data, you don't know how to protect your data, you're probably falling behind on that curve. So we've launched a few national programs to address that. SkillsFuture for Digital Workplace is a broad-based national training program to provide basic information about the trends that are going to come in this space and to get the general population comfortable with the disruptions, the innovation that they are going to see. And then for specific industries, we have more intensive training in areas, in emerging skills areas like advanced manufacturing, cybersecurity, data analytics, financial technologies, and so on. And that's under the SkillsFuture series. In this space, I think there's opportunity for countries to share best practices, because I don't think we have cracked the entire puzzle. Certainly, we're far from it. How do we motivate individuals? How do we work with the mindsets, the fear, the resistance, and how do we design and deliver effective training that can reach the broad segments of population, not just those who are technically inclined, but those who are perhaps resistant and even fearful, to be able to then raise the level of literacy across the board. So more sharing across different countries and different policymakers will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these good solution proposals, and very concrete in the 3 cases, I think. So a lot good practices for other countries to learn, and I think it's good that we have an international audience and international speakers, so we can profit from other countries' ideas. Now, what Michael proposed are how we can use artificial intelligence to improve the education system, but we need the people actually who can implement this technology in order to get a better system. And I invite Hyung to give us some ideas on the education of artificial intelligence engineers.
Yeah, actually the topics of our panel is about the AI development for social goods. But once you get all the solution proposal, everybody talking about cultivating the AI talent. So we That's why we are talking about education and training of AI. But my proposal is more on how we get necessary AI talent for those the development of AI solutions for social sector. Okay, for better communication, I write a script. I very closely follow my script. Okay. AI solves variety of problems. Now, the real value of AI is wide applicability, right? It leads to innovation to all the industry and impact strongly in the entire society. Computer vision, natural language processing, and deep learning are currently mostly widely used AI technology. There are already many AI solutions in commercial sector, but and all the companies want to use more AI technology for their business. But successful AI use cases cannot be easily found in the social sector. There are several reasons for this. The main reason is, I think, the lack of AI talent in the social sector. Creating AI solutions of real-world problem requires high levels of expertise, and such talent is simply short in general, particularly in social sector. The social sectors, like the NGOs, have difficulty in hiring and retaining AI talent because of the high salary of AI staff. We must cultivate enough AI talent so that we may fill the commercial sector first, then overflow them into the social sector. By the term AI talent, I mean not only the research people who engage in discovery of a new technology, but also the AI practitioner and engineers who implement AI solutions by known technology using open source software tools. The lack of AI talent is a global problem. Most of AI talent is produced in the United States, and large portions of them is working in the tech giant in the United States. South Korea is having a hard time securing AI talent. To make matters worse, the brain drain to US tech giant makes the situation worse. Local companies are losing competitiveness because they cannot hire AI talent. But it is not easily overcome because cultivating talent takes a long time and the universities cannot be prepared. There is no silver bullet for cultivating talent. We must nurture people from a long-term perspective. I propose to strengthen the computer science education in all the universities. We must recruit more students to computer science and train them to AI talent. So we may recruit them to be AI practitioner and software engineer. Some of them may become the AI scientist. Let me little bit details of Korean the situation. Unfortunately, the number of enrollment in computer science in Korean universities is generally very low. Even in the Seoul National University, which is known to be the largest and the best university in Korea, they have only issued 55 admission per year, which is much lower than the American universities. This happens because a very strict quota of admission was set on each of the department, and the quota wasn't changed for the last 20 years. US universities are struggling with completely different problems. That is, too many applicants for computer science. For instance, the number of enrollment in computer science department at Stanford University of last year is more than 700. It was 44% of total enrollment of engineering school. The number is steadily increased from 100 in year 2007. Fortunately, the South Korean government has made some effort recently to promote the software education in the secondary schools and colleges. Last year, we started teaching computational thinking and coding in the secondary school as a regular subject. In addition, the Korean government has funded dozens of universities in order to facilitate the computer science teaching in all the college students, regardless of their major. I'm asking, also I asked many times, Korean university to produce a high quality AI and software engineer, as many as possible. I also asked them to produce domain expert with software skills. Many of the graduates will choose jobs in the commercial sector, but some may decide to work in the social sector. I believe the best AI applications has not been developed yet. As the most powerful technology in the human history, AI will change the challenge big problems in the social sector, such as the climate problem and the life expectancy problem and property, whatever else. Furthermore, human-centered AI will contribute for the human dignity and the value of democracy. This is why we have to do our best effort to cultivate AI talent. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyung, very much for this very concrete proposal, which I think is directed to people from the government. So we need to expand computer science programs at the universities and build more AI talents. Now, if we reach that goal to have more programmers, specialists in artificial intelligence or software engineers, and they will develop AI technologies, hopefully for the social good. There remains one problem. For now, these programs are often very narrowly focused, but it seems, or what we are seeing is that AI has a very strong influence on our daily lives, on all aspects of our lives. So actually tech developers bear a very high responsibility, societal responsibility. And the question is, are the programs sufficient actually to bear this responsibility for now? Jason?
Katharina, thank you. And she already knows my answer is, of course, no. If there is one message that I have that sort of overarches not just the conversation about AI, but the conversation about the development of digital technologies and their implications for society, it is this. In my opinion, the most important societal and policy response to the first and second industrial revolution was universal primary and secondary education. Primary and secondary education provided the literacy and the numeracy that all of the population needed in order to exist in a world that the first and second industrial revolution brought about, an age with more manufacturing capability, with broader globalization and transport, etc. I believe that we need a similarly significant scale reform of higher education and lifelong learning in response to the third and fourth industrial revolutions. And I'll try and explain in 5 minutes why, through AI, I believe that and what some of the implications are. Let me start by just building off some of the things that, that my colleagues have already said. The first is when we're talking about AI is not a technology in isolation. We often think about artificial intelligence as this black box in a movie that's going to float above us and have godlike knowledge and power of everything. The reality is AI is closer to the microchip in terms of the way to think about it as a component technology. It's in everything. It's hard to think of a technology today or a product today that doesn't have a microchip in it of some way, shape, or form or another. AI is simply a deeper capability of those microchips built in with more algorithmic intelligence to make sense of whatever it is that device does. And so there are many different ways to use that and to apply it to. So in many ways, when you talk about AI, we're not actually just talking about AI in itself. We're talking about AI in vehicles, or AI in home care and healthcare devices, or AI in buildings. They're integrated technologies that are everywhere. And as we think about that, the role of AI in shaping how those technologies interact with us as individuals, with our communities and societies, that's where the social good or the potential unintended consequences and social harm begins to emerge. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is my background is as a physicist, and I spent a bunch of time in Silicon Valley working on quantum computing and molecular electronics and AI, and it was brilliant and it was a lot of fun to play in the Valley. But the idea that Silicon Valley exists in a bubble, I cannot tell you how true that is, because most of the things that we were trying to figure out, we were trying to address and solve problems that were related to the technology, the next technology barrier to get over. How do you make the algorithms more intelligent? How do you build the platform so that it's more efficient, so that you can sell more of it, so that you can integrate it into products eventually that are going to be more commercially viable? I worked for Hewlett-Packard in their quantum science group. That's all great, but at no point when I was working on those problems did I have in mind climate change, or did I have in mind poverty alleviation, or did I have in mind, or even an understanding of what it means to deploy technologies for healthcare and elderly populations. Those were not even questions that were being asked. And so for a scientist and an engineer, when I decided that actually I care very much about the societal implications of what I'm doing, what I have been doing with my career in innovation and technology, I had to go get a whole new education. I gave up a professorship at the time to go back and do a master's degree of public administration and walk into a place that was surrounded by people who didn't understand what I was talking about when I mentioned anything about quantum computing. Even basic electronics was sort of this black box thing that either worked or it didn't. And there was a huge communication barrier, a huge gap of understanding that I had to work through. And that's been a decade or longer process to go through that. Yet, for all of these societal issues that we care about, we don't have decades to have people go through a technical education, then gradually go through another education into understanding the social dimensions of the issues that they want to work on. I would argue that the first recommendation that I would have and that I put forward is that we need to integrate much more real-world problem-based learning into the education of scientists and engineers, computer scientists who are developing artificial intelligence, certainly, but as opposed to working on algorithms that are the next advancement on how an AI can play chess more efficiently, actually, we need our students working to understand a social problem and how to bring AI to bear in that context, which will also require them to interact with people studying humanities or people with actually working in civil society organizations on these issues. That sort of exposure early on in science and engineering careers can make a huge difference for the ability of those individuals later on to get involved in and apply AI technologies or any digital technologies they're working on to the types of social problems that that we desperately need that tech capability applied to. The second thing that relates to that, though, is it's great to think about reforming undergraduate education and changing the future scientists and engineers. But we've got a lot of scientists and engineers who are out there already. And in fact, I would argue a big piece of reforming higher education is we have to stop thinking about it as being something that you do in your early 20s. You don't just go to university and get a bachelor's degree and then know everything that you need to know for the next 80 years of your life. Technology has evolved significantly just in the last 10 years, as have the social dimensions of all of these problems. I would argue that higher education institutions need to be thinking much more creatively about engaging lifelong learners and bringing them back into the classroom to bring the challenges that they are facing back into the sort of design problems, the sort of problem-based learning approaches that can be brought together with undergraduates. And that ties to the third aspect of the solution proposal I put forward. It's something Director Chen raised briefly this morning, the concept of public interest innovation. Being a professor, I could easily lecture on any one of these topics for hours and hours, but I promise you I won't. The main idea that I want to encourage particularly policymakers who are funding innovation systems and research and R&D to think about is linking the funding that is put forward to universities much more directly to the engagement of those university researchers with real-world stakeholders. Professor Xu on the last panel spoke very articulately about the need to integrate more design thinking and engage students directly with stakeholders throughout the problem that they are trying to work on. That is equally true, if not more true, for the professors who are getting the big funding to do the research. But oftentimes, the criteria on which we judge research applications is whether it pushes the technical academic field further, not whether it is directly useful to taking knowledge we already have and applying it to the needs of various stakeholders within society. I would argue that if there's one core takeaway with public interest innovation, it is essentially we need more funding mechanisms and more institutions set up to do that brokering of knowledge between these great hallowed halls of academia that have built up the tremendous knowledge that's created all of our digital society today, and the groups, whether it's those that represent various aspects of the UN Sustainable Development Goals or local community development aims. They need to be much more engaged in helping set the research agenda for technology development. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this insightful intervention, and you certainly convinced me already some time ago that this change is necessary.
Can I just respond to one of the points that Jason brought up about reform of university education? As I shared earlier, the part of the reason for restructuring of the workforce development agency in Singapore was to bring this whole notion of education and training together, the formal education system and the continuing education and training system. So in the last couple of years, we've actually started reforming some of the university education. The part of the funding, so there are a couple of things that are going on. One is there's been a declining size of cohort coming through the university, coming through the education system. Generally, there's a declining population. So the cohort size now has come down quite a bit. We had to merge a number of secondary schools. We've maintained the tertiary institutions, but the cohort size has come down. So that's it. So the message to the universities that we put across to them over the last couple of years is, if you want to maintain your level of funding, you have to do more training and education of the workforce. And so every university, publicly funded university in Singapore, has now set up a decent extension, if you would, of their training capabilities. Two of the universities have started talking about an education model that's not a 4-year degree model. It's a 4+20 model. So after you get your degree, you can come back to the university over the next 20 years as an alumni to audit classes, to sit in the classes and get upskill and reskill. So there's this ongoing relationship that they have with alumni. That sounds great in theory, but if you're a working professional going in and auditing an undergraduate class, it doesn't quite work. You're looking out for different things. The format has to be different. It's got to be delivered, in an accessible manner. You can't take time off. So more design work needs to be done. But it's starting. That reform thinking of what a university should be doing, that's starting to happen in Singapore.
I think that's brilliant. The one thing I would suggest is, to your point from the last panel on the end of retirement, it shouldn't be 4 + 20, it should be 4 + 100.
Time for you.
But I had 2 quick points to add that I think are really important caveats. The first is that with education, but also with health and a lot of the other services needed to get ahead in the modern economy, the normal competitive mechanisms don't seem to work very well in terms of having change. A lot of the things we talk about that should happen in education should have happened a long time ago, but they don't. I mean, the education sector is very expensive. It's like a lot like healthcare. It doesn't reform itself naturally, but also it's very difficult to take a top-down approach to say how it should change. And that brings my second point, is that while we know these things are changing, we don't know when they're going to change. I mean, I'm thinking about when I was a little kid, and I was 7 years old in the 1970s playing. My father's a professor at MIT, and I played computer games online. I was lucky. I was able to dial up on a 56K baud modem and play a game called Empire against MIT graduate students. And one weekend I went away, and they destroyed my empire. It was really clear from the 1970s that what would happen with the internet and things, at least to me, I was worried about my friends taking all the bandwidth. I wouldn't let them know about the game. This was like 1973 or 1974. The thing about this, though, is that I didn't know when things would happen. And so we can say we want this sort of skill and this and that. We actually don't know exactly when. We know we have a good idea things will change, but the timing is really, really hard to predict.
I don't know how many of you get training in computer science, but in the computer science, we already do program-based learning, and also we do a lot of project, real-world project. In KAIST case, we should do some real-world project for the graduation. And also, I like to mention that the curriculum is continuously updated by the IEEE and ACM, or the Professional Society. And every 5th year, we produce a new curriculum suggestion. And in that, about 50% of our time on the undergraduate program should teach or get involved in social issues and ethics. So computer science is doing pretty much eager to update the social requirement.
So this is good news, I guess. We should learn from South Korea and the curriculum, but what was missing in South Korea, as I understand, are the students, right? So we also need students to participate in the programs in order to get more AI talents. One point that we haven't talked about, and which I think is very important in the context of transforming the education system, is the teachers. So, Mike, you raised the point that a top-down approach is difficult in the education system, or it takes very long. So what about our teachers? At least my impression from Germany is that teachers, may it be in school or in universities, they actually don't want to change curricula. And it's very hard to convince them that, for example, teaching digital technologies already at an early age is important. Do you have any suggestions?
We don't need as many of them. There's more scale. So if we can download Dennis Snower, we don't need a lot of the other people. So I think there's so much scale in this that I don't think as many teachers are needed, and that will naturally deal with the problem.
Very, very provocative statements. Do you want to reply?
Well, I agree in many ways, but I think, let me just pivot first, Katharina, to one thing you raised, which is the incentive structure. One of the reasons that pushing curriculum reform is often difficult is professors in universities are primarily rewarded on our research performance, not on our teaching performance. And so if we get to teach the same course every year for 20 years without changing it, that means we have more time to do research. That is not the incentive structure that I think we need. And I do think there are many ways to start looking at the classroom as being a place where you are running experiments and doing research with real world stakeholders. And so it's a different way of thinking about, I agree, Mike, with the, so let me frame it a different way. If what you are doing in the classroom is knowledge delivery, in other words, you can do it just by speaking at somebody, a computer can do that just as well as I can. They can, and actually better, because it can be George Clooney delivering it instead of me. I mean, there's so many different ways to deliver the same content. But if instead what the professor is doing is facilitating interactions between people, that's something that's actually very hard to do. And actually current AI is nowhere close to being able to facilitate that. That's a long way off because there are many human dimensions to that. And if that's what we're doing in the classroom, and we start to bring in stakeholders from different stages of career who are wanting to learn but also wanting to use the knowledge of the students to help deliver new ideas and solutions, actually I think we can start thinking about who is the teacher in the room as being a much broader concept. You bring someone back who's in their 40s, who's working in the Government Department of Work and Pensions in the UK, into a classroom with a bunch of computer scientists and engineers and business students. Well, the person from Work and Pensions is going to learn a lot about what the latest technologies are, but the students are going to learn what the heck Work and Pensions is and what the government department does and how the social issues work. And the professor there is a facilitator and a curator, not professing, not lecturing. So we might need to rethink the titles that we use, but it changes the mode. And I think that's the direction of travel that
Another way of putting what you're saying is basically there's so many transaction costs, and so you have a teacher doing everything.
Yeah.
And you're breaking it down into different things, and you're getting different people involved.
Yes, very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So if I can jump in, I'm going to completely disagree with Mike. I don't think we need less teachers. I think we need more. The challenge now is you're expecting our current cohort of teachers to be able to keep up to date with the latest and be able to deliver. I don't think that model is quite sustainable. And I explain why we need more, and that draws into some of Jason's point as well. If we believe that we are moving deeper and deeper into a knowledge-based society, knowledge-driven economy, it must be that individuals have to keep learning and deepen their learning. So a teacher may not need to be the traditional form that we think about in school. We still need those. But beyond that, we need industry practitioners to share the knowledge. We need experts within organizations to organize learning circles within companies. We need companies to come together and share best practices. We need even more learning than before, because the competitiveness in the new economic paradigm is going to be driven a lot by knowledge and how you harness insights, AI as part of that. And so education and training has to be seen in a much broader context. In the Singapore context, we have established an Institute for Adult Learning that does certification of adult educators. And they have to go through different training modules to be certified to be eligible to provide training for government-funded courses. I think the adult educators need to achieve a level of competency not unlike what we do for teacher certification today. They need to be designing pedagogy, designing curriculum, and delivering it in ways that is effective at reaching the kind of target segments. So from that perspective, I think that the teacher population is going to expand, including involving industry practitioners to come and share some of the knowledge and the latest emerging skills in the space.
Because I retired from the KAIST, I have nothing to lose. I agree with Mike. But I like to support Michael. The conventional teaching method should be changed, and conventional professor should be changed to adapt to new technological development. but so I think that they need.
We're defining teacher differently. So we need more teaching assistants, but do we need more, Dennis Snower? We can copy him or we can download him. So we don't need a lot of different Dennis Snowers, but we need a lot of people to help in that process of downloading him. Those are the assistants. So it's a different structure. And so, yeah, in many respects, I agree. We need more staff, but we don't need, more the download content. The old models, we have lots of different professors out there, and we try to emulate them. We need fewer people to emulate.
Just a very quickly reply before we come to Jin Chung.
Recently, Korean government established the teaching institution called Innovation Academy, which copy of the French École 42. In there, there's no degree, no teacher, and we just collect the good student together and provide the computing facilities and project. And they do solve the project by themselves. That's the recently that we established.
Michael, do you want to reply very quickly? Or?
I was going to just make an observation about teachers and the challenges they face. Some of the emerging skills that we're looking at it's happening within the industry. So, for example, if you think about the latest way to mine data, to develop insights, and how to apply that to solve particular user needs and so on, that knowledge base is starting to be created within by industry, and in a way, academia is not leading the way in a number of these areas. I mean, it's computer science departments, computer science professors can work on the next algorithm and so on and so forth, but it's the Googles and the Baidus that are advancing machine learning or search algorithms and so on and so forth. So the challenge is, how do we have an education system that can draw on the expertise that is coming out from the industry? And it's necessary. I'm getting stories of IT graduates not being able to get a job because they don't have the skills that are needed by the industry. And if you are an IT programmer, you're working on your project right now, and you're not keeping up to date with the latest, by the time you finish your project, you don't have the skills for the next project. Now that's a real problem. So how do we leverage on emerging pockets of knowledge creation into that whole education paradigm? I don't think we have figured that out, but I think it's very necessary as we move forward.
So I think we would need a whole day to discuss education and artificial intelligence, but our panel today is more broad, so artificial intelligence for social good, and actually Hyung, he has prepared another solution proposal which goes into AI development, but not so much into education. So I would like to invite you to present your second proposal to us.
Yeah, my second proposal was democratizing of AI. The open source allows anyone access to AI, even without deep knowledge about machine learning and AI basis. You can easily create AI applications using open source software. Nowadays, we can share even a deep network, a solution that has been trained with a large amount of data for one problem can be reused to solve other similar problems. Open source is like an oasis in desert. There are all the essentials you can get for the development of AI solutions. AI technology is now spreading at the speed of light through the internet. The AI research result created by one party can be fully reproduced by another. Even small startups in the remote area can utilize the world's best AI technology for their business. In this sense, the world is already flat. The democratization of AI will accelerate the progress of technology. It will also strengthen the supply of AI solutions to solutions and innovations in the social sector. AI solutions for the common social problems can be jointly developed in many countries and shared with others. The open source software is the right tool for the case of such a development. However, I have some concerns and worries, as AI is recognized as the core technology in almost every industry, including defense sector. A dark shadow of international politics has begun to spread into the AI ecosystem. Soon, the power of AI in the weapon system will determine the nation's military power and also the status in the international politics. The United States is the leading nation in the AI research, and most of the open source software is produced in the United States. As the conflict between US and China intensifies, the backlash from US nationalists seems inevitable, as some Silicon Valley's engineers opposed to provision of AI technology to build weapon systems. The backlash was intensified. I'm afraid that the international politics will have a negative impact on the democratization of AI. Since the supply of AI solutions for social goods depend largely on the availability of open source software, the global AI community should work together to keep the democratization of AI active. I'm asking China, Japan, Korea, and other, including Taiwan, and the anti-Oriental countries to support the AI democratization. Because AI is the culture-dependent, collaboration among those with a common cultural background may yield much larger benefit. Especially I ask China to lead this movement, because China has large data potential and eager to be number one in AI capability. I'll give a full blessing on China if she promised to support the democratization of AI. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this insightful proposal, which goes into quite a different direction than the ones before. I would like to invite now everyone in the public to ask questions so that we can use the remaining 30 minutes with the discussion with the floor. So please raise your hands.
My name is Greg Hong from Chaoyang University, and I'm also from Software Liberty Association, Taiwan. Before my question, I just have a quick comment about downloading these speakers, excellent professors, that might pose a threat to biodiversity. Okay, so my question is regarding open source, and I have some resonance from Professor Kim's speech, but also a lot of resonance from Professor Blackstock's talk about distributing or brokering existing knowledge to the society at large. So I'd like to ask all of the four distinguished panelists to comment on the importance of open source software, as well as open data or these Creative Commons things that help distribute knowledge to the general society, to the public. and how we will reconcile between the open source or open content, open access, or this Wikipedia style collaboration culture. How do we reconcile this culture with the current prevailing stance of strengthening intellectual property right? This trend, how do we reconcile about between these, especially in the AI context? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. Let us collect another 2 questions here. The gentleman in the middle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable panelists. I think today's presentation is really good. We benefit a lot. From the brave new world we have described for the future of education, I'm deeply in trouble with the present situation now. You see, education here, in general, and higher education in particular, is a highly regulated industry here. And status quo bind us with all kinds of accreditations. So we need to go through one another accreditation and standard. Even innovation design school has a standard to set up. So it's really a pity that Director Chen didn't invite officers from MOE, Ministry of Education. They should be here. And my question is, how can we get from the ghetto we are stranded to the promised land you just described? It takes the Kuhn's insight that paradigm shifts happens only when the old are died.
Thank you very much. Let's have one more question and then start answering.
Hi, this is Roger Ko from National Taiwan University again. I totally share opinion with all of you that we should proceed a kind of a higher education reform. And especially we should, that education of AI to be related to the real social issues. And but I admire Jason because Jason, you, in order to understand where are the real social problems, and especially in the governmental, and you decided to take a master degree in public administration. But the problem is that you cannot ask every professor to do the same job, So I wonder what kind of channel we can build to connect, our AI education to the real social issue, or to the people who need, this kind of AI application. How can we locate, those needs, and what will be the channel that can connect the education and the real needs? And so that's what's the connecting mechanism behind this channel? That's I really want to know, because this is very crucial, and this can really help us to understand how to proceed our educational reform in order to meet the real social needs. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we have one more question here in front. And but I think we'll get one more question and answer, and then we try to have another round of questions.
Yeah, thank you. Very stimulating. You talk about training, of course, that's directed towards human intelligence, but what will be the value and the role of human intelligence once artificial intelligence is spreading? Maybe we don't need to teach anymore. No, when I say human-centered artificial intelligence for social good, I'd say that can only be possible if this artificial intelligence enhances human intelligence, or if it doesn't do away with the need, no longer human intelligence needed, or we only need a few smart brains and the rest, who cares? They can enjoy maybe life, whatever. So that would be my question. I mean, you have any idea about how the relationship between human and artificial intelligence will look like? Thank you.
Okay, so very interesting questions. Mike, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question and an extremely important one, because it can go different ways, and it depends on how the education system evolves. So one way it can go is if there's not that much education investment and the cost of machines is relatively low, and there's going to be a battle of productivity between people and machines. And of course, artificial intelligence will enhance the productivity of people, but if it's going to be cheaper to have a lot of machines do things and then there won't be that many skilled people, then what's going to happen is you have an underclass of people. You may have to do something like a minimum income, which is essentially putting people in jail, and suppress society, and democracy can't survive. Or you can actually try to raise the level of people and enhance what they do with artificial intelligence and other things, and then they're more competitive against machines, and the machines play less of a role. I mean, the people and machines are going to be in symbiosis. The issue is the relative importance of people is in the future, and the strength of democracy is going to depend a lot on educational investment.
Hyung, do you want to reply to one of the questions?
So I'd like to comment on open source. I agree the open source has a lot of value, but how to promote that open source in the commercial sector is, I have no idea. But like the Google and Amazon, high-tech companies already make a lot of money using the open source. So probably there are ways to getting the money from the developing open source. Once you get the reputation from open source community, you can get you can make good money by developing the non-open source software. This is the way open source developers achieving. And then about your question about artificial intelligence, the impact on human intelligence, and probably you are misled by the term artificial intelligence. It's a too exaggerated term. It's just the set of the simple the tools in computing. So we are called that artificial intelligence since 1950. So still talking about the imaginary, the technology, which can be used for whatever purpose. But actual the status of artificial intelligence is very low and just a simple tool. You think that way.
I can pick up from where Professor Kim left off. It's been 50, 60 years since the term AI, artificial intelligence, was coined. If the machines were so powerful, it would be called real intelligence by now. So it's still artificial. And it means that, and I mean, we use the term AI quite loosely in our conversations. There are disruptive technologies, digitalization, robotics, but really artificial intelligence at the heart of it is ability of computers to learn. And machine learning being, and deep learning, machine learning being some terms that are being used right now. And to the gentleman's question from Chaoyang University, I think, he raised a very good point. The machines are only as intelligent as the data that you feed it. So you still need to rely heavily on human intelligence. I mean, if the machine is observing humans and how they walk, and you walk in a silly pattern, the machines will think that all humans should walk in this pattern, and will replicate that algorithm, that predictive pathway for humans. But if you feed it intelligent information, then it makes, it supports human intelligence, I think. So I don't think we're in the danger of not yet for AI replacing human intelligence. I think it can help to enhance and make certainly it can process a lot more deeply and retain a lot more data than we can in our storage. So I think it augments. The question about and that also goes into democratization of AI. As it is today, there are open source tools, you're well aware, where you can actually tap on algorithms that somebody else has written. So like in R or Python, you can call a library that somebody else has written, and that's spreading the capability of AI. But the data to train the AI tools is not widely available. and that's what's not that's still not open source yet, openly available. And I'm not sure if we can ever get to this stage where it's completely democratized in terms of data. The question about how do we reform higher education, that's a very, very difficult one. I understand that this conference is sponsored by the National Development Council, and I understand that one of the remits of the council is to pull multiple agencies together. And there's a common problem that I hear from policymakers in many countries. How do we work across ministries, because we have defined our spaces so nicely, and then now with things like technology and disruption, it cuts across. So how do we get our act together in that sense? It's a challenge. We face the same challenge in Singapore. We have coordinating mechanisms, but we really need to have that agenda discussed more broadly at the whole of government level. If not, it's very difficult to drive those kinds of reforms.
Such a rich discussion to pick up on. I think there's 3 points that I want to try and pick up from across the questions in the discussion. The first is one that I think we've all touched on in different ways, but it goes, Franz, to your question about, what's the use of human intelligence. And the best way I've ever found to describe it is this. If I give you an Excel spreadsheet that has 1 billion entries in it and no ability to write an algorithm, but you just have to stare at those billion numbers and make sense of it, no one in this room is going to do that. And if you actually look back at PhD theses from the 1960s and 70s, having 10 data points was enough to get a PhD at some point. Actually, having 3 data points was often enough. 2, you couldn't really get away with a line, but 3 data points was often enough. Now, if you're doing a PhD, the idea that you have less than thousands of data points just doesn't make any sense, but it's only with the aid of digital tools that we're able to do that. AI, machine learning, however you want to frame it, is simply more advanced versions of the algorithms that are built into Excel. Yes, there is learning capability, but it's still just dealing with numbers. Now, if you talk about intelligence as being numerical intelligence, you're right. We're getting our butts kicked by the machines, but we have been for decades anyway. But if you think of intelligence in a broader sense, one of the seminal books in education theory these days is Howard Gardner's 8 Types of Intelligence. I'm forgetting the exact name of the book. But he talks about very different types of intelligence that human beings have. There is no one I know who works on AI, who's a deep professional on AI, who has any idea or believes we are anywhere close to having an idea on how to create general artificial intelligence. We're very good at developing better and better numerical AI, but general intelligence is a long way off. I will add a caveat, which I'm not going to unpack here, which is quantum computing mixed with AI becomes a whole different conversation. We'll pick that up. So if you want, that's a wine after the session conversation. To the second point, which is the middle 2 questioners, the question of the promised land of the reform of higher education. I wish I had an answer to that. If I had an answer to that, but what I can do is just share my experiments, just as Michael sort of shared some of the experiments that Singapore is doing. I can share what has been successful from my perspective in some experiments. And the single thing that has enabled me to run experiments in UCL and in other universities that have really changed curriculum and pulled away from the mainstream is to go out and get industry and go out and get government departments, not the Ministry of Education, but whether it's the Ministry of Defense or Work and Pensions or industrial skills, get them to talk about what they need from the future workforce and bring them into the classroom to interact with the students. And then the students start demanding the skills that the employers are going to want. And suddenly the university is facing a problem that actually our curriculum does not match the skills that they're asking for. And they start allowing more experiments to go on because they don't want their students going somewhere else or complaining or protesting. So what I'm basically saying is if you get your students protesting within the university, that's a good way to get permission to change your curriculum. Now, what that requires a lot of willingness for professors to take risk, and there are lots of structural barriers within the system. But one example, Roger, to go to your question, what is an example of a program? Katharina had very kindly mentioned the program, very modestly entitled "How to Change the World" that I run at UCL. It's a 2-week design studio with 700 students that we run every year. Every engineer, computer scientist and business student at UCL has to take this 2-week course. And it's built around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And across the 2 weeks, we work in a design studio format where professors are not lecturing, but are working with these teams of students. So all 700 are broken up into teams of 5. And we bring in partners from civil society. We bring in partners from government, from industry, to help the students dig into a particular problem. And it gives them a much deeper understanding of how their skills and knowledge are relevant to these end user partners. And what we found, we've been running that for half a dozen years now, what we found is the professors who are involved and the research staff who are involved in this suddenly end up with whole new research agendas emerging from that conversation, whole new ideas for proposals that are getting funded, and they've got built-in user partners at the end already there. So from the point of view of the research agenda of the university, it's opening up a whole new set of avenues. And so it's trying to blend the best of both worlds, playing to the current incentive structures, because we can't change them overnight, but bringing in those external partners as quickly as possible. And it's hardly the only model. There are many such models. The final very brief point that I want to touch on goes back to Greg's question about privatization or the question of open source. And this goes to the point of democratization of AI as well. We talk about this entire space in terms of privatization or open source as if those are the only two alternatives. But if you think back to the early 1900s, where we had monopolies emerging around resource extraction, around utility control, actually we had national governments step in and nationalize things all over the place. Regulate utilities, regulate resource extraction, regulate and distribute wealth associated with those things. Antitrust, anti-monopoly regulations were brought in. We have not really been talking about the role of the public sector, of government, in stepping up. And so one provocative conversation I would raise is it the responsibility of government to potentially nationalize or create some national open source resources for all, or does it have to be at the international level by nature of it? I don't have the answers to that, but I think we need more of those types of provocative questions, if for no other reason than it's going to scare the big companies into opening up more because they don't want to be nationalized. So at the very least, we need that social conversation going on about the role of government stepping in much more effectively.
I just this is a very interesting discussion, and you're bringing up the point almost of the need to look more at the consumer industries, like the progressives did in the early 20th century, because a lot of the liberal politicians tend to focus on redistributing income rather than looking at the price of consumer goods and the access to consumer goods. I had a couple reflections just listening to everyone talk about the democratization of AI and some of the social bads that could lead to more democratization. I mean, the topic of military issues leading to more closed source is something that I acknowledge, but I'm worried about two things, two social bads from AI that will lead governments to respond. And this morning we heard about all the great things government could do. I'm skeptical because I tend to find that governments respond to bad things that happen rather than think ahead. And I'm gonna sort of highlight two bad things that I think could happen with AI. The libraries that people build with AI, like using Google's TensorFlow or Baidu's Paddle used for various things, could lead to a lot of outcomes that are unanticipated because it copies what other people do. So let's say job hiring using AI and leads to a lot of discrimination. Are those algorithms, or there's a big scandal connected with discrimination, are those algorithms auditable? They're not easy to audit because it's not traditional programming, it's copying things. And that's going to lead to some government regulation and need to look at things, and it's going to be very, very difficult to deal with. The second thing is cyber risk. Now, an algorithm that gets hacked and leads to huge social harm, and it very well could, it could be something like how cars on the road are managed. Accidents go way down at a micro level with AI because you have machine intelligence, but the macro risk from cyber events is much larger. And at some point in the next decade, there'll be some big cyber event that will lead to major issues and probably cause a recession of some type, and will lead to government intervention to look at these things more carefully. And it's probably better to think about that ahead of time, even though I'm skeptical it will happen, than to wait for it to happen.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm Andrew from Fung University. I'm professor, but I would like to. I work very hard every day, and I moved my job into AI. Yeah. so maybe I just very I wanted to know how the human to face life in AI. Yeah. So maybe I suggest maybe next year we can open a session to talk about, to educate mind how to after the AI age, and how human can cultivate our mind to be peaceful to face the AI age. I think not just to educate our young age people to write many computer program to move our job into AI, and we need more education to cultivate our mind to face the AI age. Thank you. It's my question.
Thank you very much for that question. I hope, I suggest that all the questions that are still in the room can be maybe discussed after the session with the panelists who will probably be around. And I would like to invite all panelists to answer the question, maybe give a very short takeaway message that you would convene to the audience today.
The question that you ask is something that I think we're going to be grappling with for decades to come at an individual through societal level. What does it mean to be a happy, healthy human, to live a happy, healthy life in a digital age? And I don't think there's a simple answer to that. You know, go back to the 1920s, and John Maynard Keynes wrote an essay on the era of my great-grandchildren, where he said 100 years from now, if productivity continues to increase the way it does, human beings won't have to work. We'll have all of our time for leisure and pleasure pursuits, and we're coming up on 100 years later, and I don't see a lot of us just playing golf or whatever it is John Maynard Keynes thought was a good leisure activity. And I think that speaks to something about us as human beings, that we have a desire to do more than simply enjoy life, but to actually contribute and lead a meaningful life. But to answer your question more directly, I don't find that in our education systems we ever ask the questions or encourage students from an early age to think about what a meaningful life is. We teach them math, we teach them science, we teach them arts, we teach them a bunch of things, but we dance around some of those fundamental questions. And I think that we as a society need to be having that at a higher level. Universal basic income could be viewed as a prison sentence. It could also be viewed as freedom for people to pursue socially beneficial activities for which there will never be a financial market. There's all sorts of ways, but we need those conversations to be much more central in our policy dialogues, and not just have our policy dialogues dominated by the next election or whether a country's leaving the EU or whatever it happens to be that's dominating the news today.
Thank you. Michael?
I'm not sure how many of you have read the book 100-Year Life. The whole notion of the 100-year life is that, you know, with advances in medical science, we're going to live to 100 years. Within our lifetime, we will see that. I don't know how true that's going to be, but one thing that's really true is that we need to stay economically productive for longer periods of time. You cannot afford to retire at 50 if you have another 50 years to go. So the question that raised by lady from is it Fengjia Daxue, Fengjia University, is a good one, which is no matter what stage we're in right now, we might think the millennials are really savvy with technology. Give them another 50 years, they will start entering that digital divide. They're going to be the have-nots by then. So how do societies keep their population comfortable with changes that are going to come? It's a mindset issue. It's not just a skill issue, but it's a mindset issue. I think there's a lot of fear around AI right now because there's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of think tanks that are talking about doomsday. There's some truth in that. Jobs are going to be changed. Some jobs will be lost, but new jobs will be created. But that second part of that message doesn't get through. The first part of the message, your job is going to be lost. That goes out, to the general population. So I think it's dispelling the myth, but providing opportunities for the general population to get in touch with what technology really is about, what limitations there are, what opportunities there are. And we need to build those structures into our societies because that, like I said, in 100-year life, we will fall off that cliff at some point in time. We need to be supported to climb back up and to live comfortably. So I think AI has a lot of potential to augment human intelligence, a lot of potential to improve productivity and to improve our lives. But we have to manage it well as a society and supported by the government, but also supported by companies and individuals need to, I think, be more active in continuing to learn throughout their lives.
Thank you. Professor Kim?
We haven't discussed the limitations of AI in general, but don't have time. But the last word is preparing AI era is urgent because the progress of this technology is so fast and its application area is so vast. So the control of AI development is not easy problem for the society. So we, as a whole, we can cooperate together to control the AI development in profitable to humans and comply with human dignity.
Thank you very much.
I was reflecting, like what would it might possibly look like. So this morning, instead of putting on a jacket and tie from my closet, an AI in my room decides what I should print. There's a 3D printer, my suit's printed. It's something that's a smart suit. It might communicate with Facebook, and if I happen to go to China after, like later in the day, to mainland China, I might be forced to take the suit off because it went over the firewall. There'll be special changing rooms in the airport. Is that something that's really difficult to deal with? It's more just change. And I think we can overstate, like we always hear the world's getting faster and faster, and there are things that are changing, but I don't think the pace of change is that fast, and it's something we can deal with, and I'm relatively optimistic.
This is a very nice final statement. I hope you have learned a lot from this panel today, and will continue the discussion on artificial intelligence for social good. Maybe today after the conference, but also throughout the next couple of days and weeks, because I think it's very important that we keep on talking about this. And please join me in thanking our speakers. I think they did an excellent job and gave some very insightful comments and solution proposals.